reinterpret these ideas that maybe they didn't believe before, but now they're seeing the other side of things.
Absolutely, kudos to you. Yes, art is completely subversive, even back into antiquity, right? Plato was very suspicious of artists because they can undermine all of tradition, all of authority. And just remember, in the Middle Ages, we had the court jester, right? The court jester was the only one, the clown, who could talk to the king. And so, and just think about the Joker in how that plays out in history. They recur. They're the person who's able to really get it out there and maybe save themselves. And the theme of the Joker, the theme of the clown, the theme of the comedian really recurs over and over again. You can do with satire, so much more than you can with bullets frequently. Yes, very good point. And art generally, right? I mean, political art. Go back to the last century and look at the politics of protest and the use of art to mobilize the masses. Just really, really powerful. They didn't have internet, right? So that's pamphlets and stuff. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, even things like Pink Floyd got a generation to completely change their mind about a certain drug.
Sure.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Just one album, one song, one piece of music changed not entire, but a lot of people's mind on something. I just think that's beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's really palpable and powerful. If you listen to music before, say, this high 60s and after during the period of protest, the vibe is fundamentally different, and it's one of questioning authority, it's one of globalization, so and solidarity too. So it's a different character altogether. Absolutely. And what's interesting about art today is that because of the internet, and this goes for music as well as visual art, of course, is that art has become more democratized than ever before, right? Because we don't have the gatekeepers, the authoritarians, showing the way. Poets, songwriters in Syria during the Jasmine Revolution were really sought after by Bashir al-Assad, brutally, and because what they had these songs which were undermining the regime, so really good point. So, yes, please.
I do want to ask what you talked about Jester, the Joker.
Yes.
You said that they are the only one who can talk to the king and they can influence him in many ways, like the art comedian. It made me think of poker cards. Like in the poker card, there's two Joker, right?
Right.
The two Joker is actually bigger than any of the king, the queen, the jack.
Joker's a wild.
Yeah, so Joker is wild. They just appear anywhere, they're the biggest. They top down everyone else, and is that connected?
Again, back to Carl Jung. His argument is that in our psyche we have these what he calls archetypes. Archetypes of the unconscious. One of them is like a Madonna. Another would be sort of like the charismatic hero. And these archetypes, they recur in history as actual people. So you see the hero in history as Moses, perhaps, maybe Jesus, or maybe Mao, right? These archetypes, they recur in history because what? We have the archetype for them in our unconscious. So when we see them in history, we respond to them. Just like we respond to the image of the Madonna over and over and over. It's kind of an archetypal image. So his argument is that this Joker, see, is also an archetype. And the Joker has special powers. The Joker is sometimes in some cultures associated with a fox or a coyote or something. And they have special things, you see. And that's why they have this ability. And not everybody is a Joker. Not everybody has that quality. So when they Marvel or some of these movie makers come up and they put the Joker in it, you see, it's not just that the Joker is a good character. The Joker is tying into our archetypal images in our unconscious. So kind of a different take. Jung's theory of the archetypes, by the way, if you want to do one more reading in here. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about what's going on with this. And this general concept of gender freedom. So the philosopher Hegel, let me just preface this first. Today, of course, most of our philosophy, most of the social sciences, is really very, very micro-focused, very detailed, very analytical in a sense of minutia, right? If you pick up journals, very narrow topics. That's a reflection of the movements in thought that began, I would say, in the 1980s, kind of a rejection of the grand view of things, the grand narrative it's called. And that grand narrative of, say, the Enlightenment in particular, where science was exalted above everything else, right, came under review. And we kind of moved into this place of like identity politics and really micro-analyses of things. And philosophies such as Hegel's philosophy of history really receded into the background, you see, because people really, they didn't really buy the idea that there was any kind of real meaning to history. The meaning to history was really found in whatever was specifically happening here, see. But, you know, it is worthwhile to revisit the idea that there is meaning in history, as Hegel argued, and how that might be playing itself out in our lives. So Hegel begins with this idea that, look, there is a certain kind of order to things. There's a certain kind of sense to history. If you go back in your history books and you look at the Roman Empire, which was one of the most powerful entities to ever, visit the planet, right? There was this sense that the Roman Empire was really impenetrable. Nothing could really happen to it. Nothing could undermine it and stuff. But at the same time, you see that there are rebellions along the fringes, right? There was a slave uprising led by the Greek slave Spartacus, and then a reevaluation of the values of the Roman Empire through the vehicle of Christianity, right? They refused to kind of play the same sort of rules that the Roman Empire insisted upon. And that led to a dissolution. But in the Roman world, you see, the emperor was free. You might have some privileges if you were a member of the upper class, but the only one who was really free to determine or actualize their existence was the emperor. So you have this in antiquity. The one is free. That could be the king, the emperor, Okay, we go on in history. Freedom is defined as actualizing. Everyone else is what in a monarchy? Everyone else is a subject, right? Subject to the crown. So we go through time, and then we find that the few are free. Hegel argues. Now, what does that correspond? Well, the French Revolution. Okay, we see this new energy unleashed on the world stage, and now the king is dethroned. Right? And we have the aristocracy then takes over.
The intellectuals?
You could say they were intellectuals too. If you were an intellectual, chances are you were an intellectual because you were a member of the aristocracy. Right. You could go to Paris and so. And so we go along. After the French Revolution, it's still a period of colonialism, of course, and the aristocracies become the elites, right? And then we reach the age of revolution and the many. Right? Many become free. Now the revolutions, the American Revolution, for example, okay, following the French Revolution, and then the 20th century revolutions, right? Anti-colonial wars, right? And so we have that period where the many are free. Okay. After we reach this stage of history, we enter into another stage where it's not just enough to be free politically, now it's necessary to be free economically. Okay, so the nature of the challenge is altered at this point. Okay, now the struggle is not just over political freedom, now the struggle is really over economic freedom. And certainly we had the revolution in Russia, China, Middle East, and developing world. Okay, and this then starts to influence how we think about political freedom. Are you truly politically free if you're not economically free? Okay. All of this is unfolding in history because of one thing. We have actually no nature, no essence, Hegel argues, other than freedom. Freedom is really what defines us. If you think about early man or your own lives, you know, how is your biology, how is the trajectory of your development gone, right? You confronted an obstacle, whatever that obstacle might be, the crib, the backyard, whatever it is. You wanted to push the envelope, right? And then at a certain point, maybe it was the car keys, maybe another point was travel. So we're constantly pushing the envelope. We constantly, in order to actualize ourselves, because all of our needs are met outside of ourselves, we have to go out into the world and confront obstacles that stand in the way of us. Just by virtue of living our lives. It's not like we're looking for a fight. We just want to be. But in order to be, I have to deal with this plot of land here that is full of rocks and is dry as toast, and I have to somehow coax onions out of it or something, potatoes. What am I going to do? I have an obstacle. I have to struggle with it. I have to overcome this. I have to go outside of myself in order to be free to develop myself, to eat it and to feed my family and what have you. Okay, so the struggle is kind of baked into existence. In order for me to be, in order for me to actualize myself, I have to overcome stuff. Yes?
Do you call that like a purpose?
The purpose, yes, and it changes. You can get back into the Erik Erikson thing of the hierarchy of needs, and you can say, look, what I have to overcome changes as I get older. You know, maybe when I'm young, you know, I need to find a career, get a career launch, maybe find someone to be with and stuff. But as you get older, you know, what you're struggling against is different. Yes? Did you want to say something? No. Okay. So Hegel reasons that if you look at history, you do see that it's the progressive unfolding of human freedom throughout history, but in a lot of different forms. And the difficulty for us seeing this is that the globe has developed in a kind of a lopsided way economically. So for example, if you look at nations of the North and nations of the South, what you find is the nations of the North industrialized earlier, right? They got, they built the steam engine and the factories and all. They built the roads and the telephone poles and all that sort of. If you have to build your country now, you have to develop your country now, you're really behind the 8 ball, as we say, right? Or you really have no cards at all to play because it's so expensive to develop, right? And so that's why we see the nations of the South, in large measure, are so poor because they're coming to the development games much late. The raw materials are so much more expensive, yada, yada, yada. So the nations of the North enjoyed an advantage because they industrialized first. What that means is the kinds of struggles that the peoples of these countries have gone through are different than the ones in advanced technological societies of the North. So one of the most interesting, I think, takes on this, a little detailed, is an argument by a political science by the name of Cyril Black. In a book called Dynamics of Modernization. And it follows Hegel's analysis. He argues that all countries go through a series of crises in terms of development. One is the challenge of modernity. I'm not going to go into all of them, but just the most important ones. That's the conflict, we talked about this earlier, with new ideas, new ways of thinking about things. So, for example, in Europe, okay, the Catholic Church had laws against usury. You know what usury is? Loaning money to people. That was verboten. If you sold stuff for money, that's not good either. You're supposed to give stuff. So Catholicism was kind of an impediment to the advancement of advanced political economy. Not to reduce religion to just the handmaiden of history, but Hegel's take is that, look, the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, was an advancement of human history because it dethroned the limitations on economic development, which is one of the reasons why the countries of Northern Europe were more prosperous than the countries of Southern Europe, which were Catholic. So his point is that, as countries face these challenges of new ways of doing things, the steam engine and the Enlightenment mentality, the forces of tradition get back on their heels and resist, see? And you get kind of wars and strife and all the rest of it. So that's the challenge of modernity. When the Shah of Iran wanted to modernize his society, he brought in a lot of Western stuff, right? He was a Western man. He was more Western than Arab. And he tried to modernize his society. He did it too fast, you see. And what happened was he brought down the whole house of cards because he unleashed the Kraken, you see. The Islamic authorities, the religious authorities, were really threatened by this challenge of modernity. And they backed up, and there was an Islamic revolution, one of the great revolutions of the 20th century. The Ayatollah Khomeini came to power in 1979 because the challenge of modernity. So this is a very tense time in the lives of nation states. The second crisis that countries go through is the consolidation of leadership. If you think about the great leaders of different countries, right? What's the difference between them and the ones who follow? Would you say? Say the difference between, say, Jefferson and and say, yes.
I feel like they were more, like, back then they were more concerned with moving forward, and now we as a society are more concerned with keeping things relatively like the same and not really moving forward as much as they have in the past.
Absolutely, you nailed it, yes. That first generation of leaders, right? whether it was Lenin, Jefferson, Mao, Ho Chi Minh, Nasser, whatever. These guys, they thought. They were theorists primarily. They understood. That's why Mao focused on culture so much. He knew the importance of culture. They saw this. The second generation, they're technocrats. They're all about counting the beans and further consolidating the leadership and stuff. And managers, they're managers. So you have the charismatic leader who founds the nation, gives rise to it, and then you have the managers who come after. And that's another crisis for society. It's the crisis of leadership, what's going to happen, the gang of war. So you see this sort of thing take place. And so here's the deal. Countries are at all different stages of this paradigm of development, you see. But what's the source of development? I want to be free. I want to actualize myself. I want to realize something for my, whatever it is that I'm up against. I stand over and against obstacles. And in order to overcome those obstacles, I have to act. I have to engage my will. I have to become something. So this is taking place in the background as kind of a macro influence. In the foreground, in order for me to actualize myself, things change. After the Industrial Revolution, the rise of technological society, we don't need to spend 8 or 12 hours a day plowing the fields, as most of our ancestors did. We have leisure time. So now, what happens with leisure time? What do you think? You think, right. What else? Yes?
Well, now, like, you mean like leisure time is in like when you don't have anything else to do, right?
Yeah, we have time to, relax, reflect.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
You're not up against it.
nowadays, really, I feel like a lot of people are just constantly on their phones scrolling through TikTok, even in their free time, because TikTok has become a tool in order to cure boredom. But the thing is that boredom was a tool that allowed us to use our minds to think about the future.
Right. So but yeah.
I think leisure time is an escape from the expectations and our duties. Saying like working a job, getting money. I think leisure time is our time to think. You don't have to think during that time. I think it's just time to relax and focus on yourself and kind of picture yourself and where you want to be.
Yeah, you don't need, really, and when you work, you don't really need to engage your whole mind in it. So, you can kind of do that, most of your work on autopilot, right? If you're, it's only going to use a certain part of your spectrum of faculties of mind, So you have a lot more time to think about who you are. It's one of the reasons why we have so much anxiety, right? Because we have all this time to really, reflect on what and who we are. So then other kinds of categories come into play here. What do I need now to feel free, to actualize myself? I've already dealt with the issue of, something to eat. I already have that handled, and stuff to drink. I already have, someone I love, right? So let's say that's taken care of. So what else do I need to do? Well, maybe I need other kinds of freedom in order to really actualize myself. Maybe I need, psychological freedom. So then we see another turn of the wheel, right? Then psychological freedom becomes the new venue for the struggle for self-actualization. So what do I need? I need to be free, not against the people with the swords in the forest. I need to be free against the incursions against my psyche that are coming at me every minute from all different quarters of the internet and the real world. So psychology becomes really important at this point, right? Psychological freedom. And so we have a new category entering the playing field here. It's not enough to be just politically free. It's not enough to be just economically free. You have to be psychologically free in order to self-actualize yourself to feel at home in the world, which is what this really is all about. Yes?
What do you mean by psychologically free? Like, what's the definition of it?
I have to know who I am. I have to have some kind of mastery over my emotions. Even if they're negative emotions, I need to be able to identify them, to name them. I don't want to just be repeating the same old patterns that I've always repeated, right? So, you know, that's what, so the ante, as we say in poker, the ante is up now. I have to get my psychological game in order so that I'm thinking clearly and I'm seeing all the pitfalls that I might fall into.
But that doesn't seem to be like a freedom thing to me. It seems more like something you want yourself to do, something like a challenge you want to.
Well, any kind of freedom would be a challenge, right?
By overcome that challenge, you achieve psychological freedom?
Well, it's, in other words, it's not something you reach. It's not like a nirvana. It's, it's an ongoing struggle, right? What are my issues, right? We used to say in antiquity, in the bad movies, the monster movies, right? The demons come in, right? Now we're honest about it. We say, well, this person's dealing with their demons. See, they're trying to get free of their demons.
I see.
Right?
I see what you mean.
So they have to,
right.
I'm in bondage to the demons.
Your inner demon.
Right, my inner demons.
I see.
Right. See, so that makes me free. So along the way, as I'm trying to become psychologically free, then I start thinking, well, what are the impediments to my psychological freedom? Well, do I feel free in terms of sexuality? Or do I feel I have to follow the path that's been, set out for me? So then sexual freedom becomes another thing. Now, Hegel's point is that each one of these things that we're thinking about, political freedom, economic freedom, psychological freedom, sexual freedom, all of these things played out in the real world. So there's an integral relationship between thought and reality, what we think and what we find in reality, okay? So it escapes the mind of philosophy, of thought, of idea, and it takes historical form. And certainly each one of these moments that we're talking about here had historical, we think about the Stonewall riots in New York, right? All of a sudden, or so it seemed, boom, Stonewall riots, gay people pushed back against, the police, vice squads and stuff. We used to round them up and beat them up and stuff in 1970. So that connection, that deep connection between thought and reality is what he wants us to see. Not only is there not a difference between mind and body, but there's a very close relationship between thought and what we make real. We first work things out in our head, and then we find its expression in actual history. Okay? So I'm going to leave it up to you to think about where we are today in terms of the struggle for freedom. It's kind of an interesting question to ask. I think that it's in that context that the drag story hour finds its expression or its context. It is in itself, whatever it is in itself, but it also is a reflection of this longest struggle, which is the struggle for human freedom, which has taken the form now of the freedom to choose one's identity. So, which is not to say that we've reached the end of the game, but that it would just involve another turn of the screw. Yes.
The thing about how to choose your identity, your gender, what type of freedom does it fall under? Is it the psychological freedom?
I think it would. Probably. It's a more refined version. In other words, once you reach another stage of freedom, it changes the way you think about the previous freedoms too, right? So you're not really free politically. I'm free to vote, but for a moment free to become unfree if I don't have economic freedom, right? So So these things are intricately related. In order for me to be really free, I have to be economically free,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So in order for me to be economically free, what's good is it if I have all the money in the world, if I'm still reproducing these same demons in my life, right?
Right.
So it shines a light. It's a really good question on what went before that. We were kind of struggling for being at home, like being recognized, being affirmed in our world. And in order for me to be affirmed as a person, I have to constantly change, I have to constantly confront whatever stands in front of me that's an obstacle to that. So in order for me to, for one to maybe actualize themselves sexually or in terms of gender, they have to push back against whatever it is that's working against that. Now that could be any number of things. So and here's the really intriguing thing about it. You find that this is playing out all over the globe in so many interesting and diverse ways. Not the gender freedom, not the identity, but the manifestation of human freedom. It takes a lot of different forms, and it's just so interesting to see it. You know, there is a hidden logic, Hegel argues, to the movement of history, and that logic of history is reflected in the relationship between our thought and reality itself. Okay? I use a term that is kind of useful here. It's zeitgeist. The zeitgeist. I'm not religious, not spiritual, not God. The zeitgeist is the movement of reason in history, or thinking, you know, trying to realize itself as free in history, and it will eventually undermine everything that kind of stands in its way. So the zeitgeist, if I asked you today, you know, what is the zeitgeist telling us today, right? Look around the world, what do you see? Where is the zeitgeist today?
Cultural world?
Well, okay, the cultural, just the general world.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
All right, so let's switch gears just a little bit. I just wanted to go over a few more points in Lewis Gordon's take on invisibility. I don't think we got through them all last time. Just to recap a little bit. The first kind of invisibility is invisibility by way of hyper visibility. Okay, hyper visibility, being too much because of not belonging. Okay, so there's too many of anything, and because there's too many minorities, there's just too many minorities. The argument goes, you know, and you hear this everywhere. There's too many immigrants. There's too many, you know. Well, that is a way to create invisibility because you're really not recognizing the personhood, the individuality of anyone. You're just kind of saying, well, there's too many. So you're lumping them in there and kind of dismissing them, making them invisible. The second kind of invisibility is an indigenous invisibility, and that's the one that involves time. You know, like the Native Americans, they're invisible because they belong to the past, you see. They're from a bygone era, and so they don't matter. They're like primitive peoples and stuff. So their time has passed, and so they're invisible because of that. Okay. The third type of invisibility is one of voice, and he uses the example of women and their voice. Remember we talked about the great little fairy tale, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. Who's the fairest of the wall? And so he's asking us, well, why? It's the queen who's asking the question. Why does the queen want to know? She is the queen, after all. And so he talks about how voice is a form of making people invisibility, suppression of voice, not allowing them to be heard. Okay. And think we got through that one. And so the fourth kind of invisibility is exoticized. How would exotic, being exotic, make one invisible, do you think? What do you think he's getting at with that? Do you have any examples? Yes.
Was it like reduce a person's being like this creature or like this new idea, like a shiny new tool?
Yeah, reductionism. I'm going to reduce you to whatever, I think, so I'm going to give you special qualities, you see. But by giving you those special qualities, I'm taking away your humanity. So I say, well, women, they're just they're so nurturing. I don't know where all these nurturing women are, but supposedly they're very nurturing, and they have this nurturing nature or something. And by saying they're nurturing, of course, the implied this is that, of course, they're nurturing. That means they're not aggressive. That means they don't have a will. That means they don't have a voice of their own. They're so intuitive. Those women, they're so intuitive. But what does that mean? If I say you're very intuitive, what does that mean? It means you're not smart, right? Because you're intuitive. So I'm giving you special qualities, you see. I'm exoticizing you as a way of taking away, more fulsome qualities that you have by virtue of your excellence. He gets into another example. Students like some disagree with this. He talks about the valorization of black women who, through this form of exotic perspective, supposedly have a special magic. The racial exoticist plays a bad faith game of bestowing an intrinsic sense of superiority through being supposedly able to identify the intrinsic virtues of racially appreciated people. Black magic women, like women's magic or something. That's what he's talking about here. We're saying that they have this, this magical quality, you see, but it's a way of taking away the rest of their qualities. See, well, but that means I can't put you in this other category, you see, because you're this magical type. I'm going to give you the magical thing, but I'm going to take away all the other qualities that define us as a person. Thoughts on this form of invisibility? Exoticized. In exoticism, humanity of racially valorized people is lost. Their extolled visibility hides or renders invisible their humanity. You think so? Did you have anything? Opinion on? I'd be interested to know if you think that this something you see a lot of in culture. I think it's attributed to different groups. It's again this show game, right? I'm going to give it with this. I'm going to take it away with that. The fifth kind of invisibility is epistemic. This last form of invisibility has already arisen in the imposed false image born of historical misrepresentation and produced by institutions of blacks and other people of color. If whites are the only agents of history, then only the products of whites could be historical. Egyptians and Judeans and Jesus have particularly become white, despite the fact that the early fathers of the church were mostly Africans. Images of them frequently resembled Santa Claus. Nearly every great ancient philosopher, mathematician, and poet looked like some version of the large, rosy-cheeked, white-bearded elf. This is even true of the real St. Nicholas, who was actually born in Turkey. He was a person of color. The logic of this form of invisibility is that black, brown, and red people cannot produce knowledge. What do you think about that? Knowledge comes only from from the white Anglo-Saxon world. Can't come from these other areas in this form of invisibility. Epistemic. You know, I had a friend of mine who, very gifted, political scientist, and went on to teach, you know, many, many years. But as a young person, she worked for one of the financial corporations on Wall Street. I think it was Equitable Securities. I don't even know if they're still around. But she was relating to me that she was Italian. She was relating to me that, you know, she used to come to work early because she was really into, you know, being a career person, getting ahead in the job and stuff like that. And so one of these really blue bloods came in, you know, upper class partners in the firm, and she's agreed and said, "All right, blah, blah." And he said, "Well, you know, maybe we can clean up the ethnic look around here." And it was like, okay, you know, I'm going to take away your seriousness, okay, by defining you as, you know, having this ethnic baggage that you know, have with you. Because after all, only the white bread, you know, intellectuals can really dispense knowledge. So, it's like a vicious circle for a lot of minority scholars in America, because then they become, like if you're an African American and you're contributing in African American studies or something, then you become like, oh, he does African stuff, he does black stuff. You know, if you're a woman, then it's like a woman historian teaching in college, even at Harvard, oh, she does women's stuff, you see. You're never the person who's doing the real serious stuff, you know? Yes, please.
What time period was that?
Oh, that was like the 60s, yeah, early 60s, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the corporate culture now is quite different than it is. Did you want to?
I was just thinking that I think I read an article that spoke about like white privilege. I think they literally called it like white privilege.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a lot of what you're saying and a lot of what's written in the book, because it's like, it basically said, there was like an example that she basically said how she went to a job interview and she was sitting across from a white person. She was black herself, and immediately she knew that she wasn't going to get the job because she seemed maybe more overqualified for the job, and she probably wasn't, and just because of her skin color. And then she also got treated differently when she walked in, so she just felt it. She was like, oh, you know, I felt white, like, you know, white privilege.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and even in sports, you know, like in the NFL, like, you know, we have some black quarterbacks now, but there was always this kind of mindset, and there's been some exposés and pushback against it, that only if you wanted a quarterback, the quarterback had to be white, you see, because they, you know, that was part of their DNA or something. And you know, and that has changed, but it didn't change right away, you know. And same thing with other sports, of course, as well. So yeah, I think that this epistemic, as he says, you know, component to you know, kind of white thought is, you know, an interesting thing. And I think the exoticizing, you know, giving people qualities and then as a way of actually taking away what they actually are good at, you know. So yes, please.
I just want to like go off that point. As a white person, I can 100% say there definitely is white privilege, because I have sped in my car. I sped a little bit, and I have never been pulled over in my entire life. I have done some shady things and never gotten questioned by the cops or whatever, but I have black friends who have done the exact same things and have been pulled over or talked to or criticized for it. And I just think that's terrible. That's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
But me, myself, I can't really do anything about it. Like, I can't really change.
You just did, though.
What do you mean?
By telling that, see, you've contributed to the discourse about it. So, which is back to Hegel again. Thinking is action. You know, it doesn't get the same play as doing something, you know, with stuff does. But thinking stuff and then sharing it is really powerful. So yeah, when you do that, yeah. Thank you.
What he said, I mean, I can kind of relate, but not relate, because I got stopped many times with many consequences. But this also plays with police brutality with white privilege. And like, for example, I'm Arab, but I'm seen as white, so there's never yes and error. So I might be privileged, but then they know your error, and maybe they're gonna see a different way, you know, so there's many ways to it.
Yeah, I mean, really interesting point. It does cut a lot of different ways. So, yeah, I think we've all had, you know, kind of a tutorial on a lot of this stuff the last couple of years. So thanks, everybody. Really great to hear your perspectives on this. I'm trying to get Louis Gordon to come down here next month. That would be cool.
Cool.
Really interesting guy. The author of this book is.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's also chair of philosophy. Those of you going up to stores, you know, next fall, definitely should make it a point to introduce yourself. So, yeah, so let's have a good week, everyone, and great.
Thank you.
I did, yeah, let me get you. If you didn't,